This is an interview we're conducting with Nabil Shaban, primarily known for his part in Doctor Who as Seal. I'd like to start off by asking you, Nabil, when you first decided to go into acting as a professional career and what motivated your decision.
Don't know. Could be when I was a kid at school, or when I was in hospital. About 7, I think. Some Shakespearean actors came in, dressed up as Hamlet, Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, Richard III. I don't know what they were doing. They had swords and spears. And I thought the world had gone mad. So they walked into a hospital ward in this crazy costume. And I thought, that's good. I like the idea of the world being mad. And I discovered that they were actors, so I thought I would join that insanity. But it wasn't really fully formed at the time. I just thought I liked that. I mean, I've always liked storytelling, telling stories, making up stories, acting out stories, and I always used to sort of organise my friends into adventures, always looking for adventures. And in the real world that we have to inhabit, it's pretty mundane. So you have to sort of create excitement, even if it's only make-believe, by being an actor or a writer or director. And I think that was what the sort of motivations. And also there's always a thing about being involved in storytelling is that you can try and create worlds which you think should exist, or enable you to sort of move from evil situations and end with good situations. And the fantasy world of theatre and that, it enables you to do that. So they're the sort of basic motivations, I think, for wanting to do it. It's very difficult to work out exactly when I started to think that I would definitely want to be an actor, except I know that I made attempts to be an actor when I was 16 by writing to drama schools, who all told me to piss off because I was in Wiltshire. And I made various attempts to join amateur groups, and again I didn't succeed. The only way I could get to do acting was just to organise the thing myself, joining in with other people. They tend to underestimate your capabilities. So eventually, back in '79, myself and a friend set up a theatre company of disabled actors, and that was when I really got started.
Did you find that sort of attitude was very frustrating?
Yeah, it was frustrating. I mean, you know, you'd go for an audition, and this would just be for an amateur setup, let alone something that was supposed to be professional. And they'd keep you waiting. Then finally you're asked to do your bit, and then eventually you'd get a letter from them, very short and sweet, saying, "There's nothing wrong with your acting, but we feel that because you're in a wheelchair, you might not be able to withstand the rigours of, performing on stage or whatever." They always say there's nothing wrong with your acting, but. So it is very frustrating to know that people do think that you could do it as an actor, but you might have the talent or whatever, but because you're in a wheelchair or you're on crutches or you're blind or whatever, they feel that you can't do it. And I don't know whether it really is the fact that they think you can't do it because of these things, but they think that the audience will be disturbed by seeing you do this, or it's because able-bodied people perhaps, or they're meant to believe that if you're disabled you're someone who's in a pathetic situation and that you're supposed to feel sorry for them. Now, you can't feel sorry for a good actor or good artist or director who's disabled, but are actually succeeding in entertaining you, in controlling your emotions, in telling you what they think and how they believe the world should be, you can't feel sorry for them. And people might find that upsetting, that they can't feel sorry for them anymore, and they prefer to. And that might be part of their feelings, that if they were made disabled, they'd like people to feel sorry for them, or they would feel sorry for themselves. So much of people's attitudes to disabled people, I think, are based more on their own fears of being made disabled themselves, and that they would feel sorry for themselves, or people would, disregard them. And so they have a very distorted way of viewing disabled people.
Do you think, so you were saying earlier downstairs that directors and producers are reluctant to cast disabled people purely because what they fear, that the audience's reaction. But on places that you have been cast, I mean, has their fear been unfounded then?
To tell you the truth, I don't actually know, because some of the things that I've done haven't yet been shown.
But Sill's got a good.
Yeah, Sill's had it. The thing about Sill is that people don't if they don't know me, they don't know I'm disabled. I'm just a creature. Because I'm small, they might think I'm a dwarf actor playing the part, and they might imagine that once I've finished working on Doctor Who, I'll get up and walk away. There's nothing in the thing itself that says that Sill is a disabled actor, which is quite nice in a way. It's quite nice, that when people see me, they don't realise that I'm the person that played Sill. And secondly, a number of dwarf actors that I know have often been accused of playing Sill, and they don't seem to be too upset about it. So
I argued my friend about it. He's convinced it was David Rappaport.
Yeah, I know.
It's not.
I know. A lot. Actually, I've had that quite a lot. People have said they thought it was Dave Rappaport playing the part. And I've done various documentaries, and I know that when I've been on stage, it doesn't upset the audience at all. I was Jesus. I go from one extreme to another. Earlier this year, I played Jesus in Godspell, and I leapt at the chance to play that part because I knew that I was probably the most unlikely person to play Jesus, particularly as a reputation for playing sort of slightly demonic or evil or suspect characters. Secondly, I'm not a Christian, and I thought it would be quite a challenge to play someone who I have doubts about, as either existing or being the Son of God. Thirdly, I thought it would be good anyway to try and bring the sort of concept of Jesus into the 80s, as opposed to the sort of David Essex kind of concept of him. So, and the thing was, I didn't get any feeling at all that people found that experience disturbing. They may have found it more poignant. They may have found it added a different light to him that it was a disabled person being crucified. That might have been quite a shocking experience, but I don't think people said it shouldn't have happened. It may have highlighted the vulnerability. Jesus was supposed to have been someone who fought for the underdog, and to actually have someone who is obviously an underdog play that part made his message perhaps even more powerful. So it had a lot to offer. In fact, although I'd just been playing in a stage production of The Emperor, which was about the last days of the reign of Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. Now, Rastafarians who venerate Haile Selassie as a messiah were outraged by the fact that I, a disabled person, should play someone who they'd treat as a god. They considered that an insult, number one. But that was because it conflicted with their religious views. if I'd played Jesus, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago, then there would have been Christians who would have been outraged. Now, when, nearly everyone's played Jesus at some time or other, and maybe, the strength of feeling wouldn't have been the same. Maybe there'll be some Shakespearean buffs when I come to play Hamlet next year who will be outraged. But it's not that people find it sort of disturbing in itself, it's that it's something that conflicts with their own perception of a particular character. I mean, there might be, for example, Doctor Who buffs who would object to the idea of Doctor Who being played by a woman. I mean, I know of several instances where agents have put forward women actors for the part, and so far they've been turned down. So it's really a question. In those instances, it's just people's expectations, their ideals, sort of. But it doesn't actually have to have anything to do with disability in itself. So casting directors and producers shouldn't get upset about it.
Would you see it as it probably would be, I'm thinking about it myself, but a sort of like, we sort of solve this problem, but our radio work, where people wouldn't see, the directors wouldn't see, but they could only then be looking for voices. I mean, I know you got a campaign. Is that sort of an idea that you can use it as the bridge to then make from television once you?
No, not necessarily, because people, unless if I sort of compromised and said, okay, I'll just work on radio because then producers would be quite happy to leave it at that.
Yeah.
I mean, people are lazy on the whole. People aren't prepared to sort of make great leaps forward, and if they can find a way out of not going beyond what they already do, they will find a way of not doing it.
I find that true of any sort of entertainment area. Yeah. Nobody will ever make the first move until somebody else does, and then they all copy it.
Then they all cash in on it.
That's right.
I mean, most of the great films were made by people who, usually independent film companies or independent producers. They make the sort of risk. They take the risk, and then the big Hollywood moguls, producers, move in and produce a sort of carbon or a very second-rate carbon copy of it, which hasn't got the same intensity or sincerity of the original. But that's it. That the people with the money always wait for someone else to take the risk. So, I mean, I'm not just in acting because I want to be an actor, because I have an ego trip. I want to sort of exhibit myself to the public. I want to show up and wear nice clothes or fancy clothes. I want to use the fact that I am a representative of a minority that's misunderstood and abused and oppressed. And if I sort of opted to be a radio actor, then I'm not using that opportunity. It's a cop-out. The public, the able-bodied public audience, has to be faced with seeing a disabled person, whether they're spastic, blind, Mongol, or someone suffering from Down syndrome. They have to be faced with those facts and accept those people as human beings who have a right to exist.
There's only one way to do that.
Yeah. And you have to confront people.
It's a fear of anything unself-like, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, let's face it. I mean, Doctor Who and science fiction and science fantasy reinforce those fears, because usually the villains are ugly, deformed, grotesque creatures. Occasionally, you'll get the Master or the Valiard or whatever, but on the whole, they're creatures which we fear in nightmares, which have some physical deformity or some ugly appearance.
There was the John Purvis story, the Silurians, where the Doctor worked very hard because everyone saw them as aliens, wanted to destroy them, but the Doctor actually tried to work hard to save them but failed. And it's a nice twist.
Yeah.
He's saying just because they're alien, you shouldn't ignore them.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably something that's missing out of Who, and that would, I think, in some way help further your cause or something. If people would say, because it's different, it doesn't mean to say it's evil or bad.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should just have more Doctor Who stories where, you know, I mean, notice, right, that nearly all the Doctor Who stories where there is an oppressive regime, the freedom fighters, the resistance movement, the rebels are very good looking usually. They're human or humanoid. And the oppressors are always ugly monsters. Maybe it's about time, but it was the ugly monsters who were being oppressed and who are the freedom fighters and the heroes.
I mean, there was that in Space 1999 story, they had these robots who learnt everything from the human slaves, and the human slaves wore masks to hide their faces, but these robots were beautiful people to look at, but they were evil, and they'd learnt everything except aggression, and they were like giving these people rotten food to taste and trying to take the women away so that they could get the aggression. It was the only stage they hadn't learned how to hate, and they wanted to learn how to hate.
Yeah.
You've played some very interesting parts throughout your career. Haile Selassie, talking about Hamlet. Are there any roles that you would like to play or would like to see written, especially for you?
I'd like to be involved in some romantic stories because I think there's still a lot to be done in that area. I mean, the able-bodied public still tend not to think of disabled people as sexual people with sex lives, being sexually desirable in any way. I mean, they might not find them desirable, but maybe someone somewhere does. I think, the whole sort of sexual politics of disability needs to be portrayed in various plays and films. Nearly every movie that's made, there's a romantic element, even if it's a horror film or a thriller or whatever, there's always a boy meets girl element to it. But very rarely, if there's a sort of disabled or whatever character in it, that part is sort of tends to be cut out, that element to it. So I'd like to be involved. I'd like to have some romantic leads. Secondly, I'd like to be in the more sort of heroic part. I mean, I would like, if we must have films where you have, Richard Gere, or Madonna, or Sean Penn, or Tom Cruise, or whatever, sort of being the vigorous, energetic, heroic character. If we must have that kind of stereotype, then let's have other kinds of people playing those parts, other than the ones who look like models. And that they're the sort of parts that I would also like to do, not because I want to appear, a nice clean-cut hero, but I just want people to wake up and realise that this world is populated by a great assortment of shapes, sizes, personalities. I mean, some of the most attractive looking people can be the most utter bastards. And the other way, it can be the other way around, the most grotesque. I mean, there's a film that's been out recently, Enemy Mine, which does actually attempt to sort of show a relationship between a so-called ugly monster from another planet actually being involved in trying to bring about some kind of peace, and there's a sort of partnership going on between the human space, the human astronaut, and the so-called ugly. And so I always want to be in roles, if I can, which are pushing back the boundaries, which are raising consciousness. That's why I wouldn't want to be in anything like Dallas or Dynasty or EastEnders, any of the sort of soap operas, because I feel that they pander to a meaner aspect of the human personality, and they're like Karl Marx said that religion was the opiate of the people. Well, I think the soap operas are now the opiate of the people.
What was your initial reaction when you were offered the part of Syl, and what did you, how did you see the character?
Well, my initial thought, well, I sort of had a number of sort of thoughts at the same time. I mean, one was honour. I felt honoured and flattered that I'd be asked to appear in a leading role in a programme which I had liked or loved so much as a kid and as a young adult. At the same time, I was worried about playing a monster that was evil. I didn't want to be part of a process that was going to be reinforcing stereotypes. On the other hand, it's not obvious that Syl is a disabled creature. He's not, or it's not. It's just a creature that's out of its element, really, and one can't go over the top. There can be a tendency for like say blacks to say, oh well, we're only going to play good guys, and women only playing sort of good women or whatever, and disabled people saying, well, we don't want to play roles where we're too saintly, because society expects us to be very saintly. Neither do we want to just play roles where we're out and out villains. And if we're not careful, we end up just playing very mediocre characters, which is very boring for the actor. So I wouldn't like to be caught in the trap where I sort of turn down work of evil characters because I'm afraid of, sort of reinforcing the stereotype. That was another sort of feeling that I had at the same time, that I shouldn't actually turn it down either. I mean, I think a disabled actor, like any other actor, should be able to play a whole range. So you can either play Gandhi, or you can play James Bond, or you can play Richard III, or you can play Syl. And that the parts that you play shouldn't be decided just by your appearance or disabilities. So they were the sort of thoughts, immediate thoughts that I had when I was offered the part. And then after that, I thought, well, I definitely want to do it because I see it as a way forward. And what I wanted to do then was try and create a real character. I mean, I wonder whether, people who go into Doctor Who take it seriously enough, other actors. I mean, as a kid, I took the programme seriously. As a young adult, I wanted to take it seriously. I wanted to believe in the situations. I wanted to believe in the creatures, the heroes and villains, and in Doctor Who. And so I would get annoyed if I sensed that actors and writers weren't taking it seriously and were sort of treating it as a joke, tongue-in-cheek, etc. And so I wanted, personally, to make sure that Syl was as frightening and as believable as possible. And, I hoped, certainly with the first episode, the first story, Varos story, that I would scare children. I wanted to scare children, because I knew as a kid I liked being scared. And I liked being frightened by the Daleks. And I know that kids do enjoy being frightened, and that it's only the namby-pamby parents who, overprotective and sort of, like to protect it. So I was really pleased when Points of View and Radio Times had letters of complaint from parents saying that Syl was a horrible, slimy, obnoxious creature, and that children were frightened. I thought, good, I've done my job, because that's what I set out to do. And so in a sense I was a bit disappointed, I suppose, with the second story, where the script, because of the complaints by the public and that, didn't allow me to continue to create a character that would have a depth and reality to it. Because after all, when you watch it, that's one of the reasons why I sort of, people sort of talk about Dallas. They say, "Oh, it's just a joke. You can't really believe in it," and so on. And you can see that there is a kind of tongue-in-cheekness about Dallas. And I think, there's a place for spoofs, but there's a place for trying to make things as real as possible. And Doctor Who was never designed to be a spoof science fiction. It was designed to be taken seriously. So therefore, an actor or special effects people or directors have to treat it as a serious story. And that's what I wanted to do. I don't know if I achieved it, but that's what I wanted to do.
Would you have liked to have been given more say in how the character was portrayed, particularly with reference to the second story?
But I suppose I would have liked it if, say, for example, I'd sort of been involved in the sort of scripting process. But sometimes it's impossible to produce something worthwhile by committee. And there might be a whole range of people who want to have an involvement in how the script, the design people. I mean, I'd have quite liked to have been involved in Sill's design, but I have to accept the fact that Sill was 99% created before I appeared on the scene. It was a Philip Martin creation. The people who designed Sill's costume had nothing to do with me when I'd sort of arrived, and they'd already decided what Sill would look like, how Sill was carried about, the sort of life support machinery that he was on was decided by special effects. So in a way, it would, I think, it'd be a bit conceited or self-obsessed of me to say, well, I'm the actor playing the part, and I think, I should have because an actor can't always be involved in saying what can and cannot be done. But at the same time, I started, once I'd taken Sill on, it became my creation as well. So obviously I would have liked to have put in a lot of my own ideas as to who and what Sill was and where he came from. I have got that habit. I mean, I remember once when I was in Walter, I was interviewed, and I was pontificating about the character that I played in Walter, and the writer was astonished because he said, "God, I never thought of him like that," or you seem to know more about the character than I do. And again, I suppose it's just that I sort of think very hard about who it is and where that I'm playing and what their context is, and maybe it's because I'm a frustrated writer as well. I tend to create more about the thing. And if I don't get those opportunities, I obviously can feel frustrated about it. And maybe I shouldn't do it, because, actors there to say the lines, do as they're told.
Would you like the opportunity to get it more actively involved with the other side of the camera, say writing, possibly producing, even directing?
Yeah, eventually. I mean, I do like to write, and I would like to actually, because I like storytelling, so I do want to be involved in actually putting a story together, similarly directing. But at the moment, my main interest is acting. I'd like to write what I act in. I mean, I have attempted that a couple of times. I wrote a play for the BBC, which was to be a vehicle for me, the actor, and the BBC paid for it. Then they decided against doing it. And I've written various other films, scripts, which haven't been taken up. And I've had lots of ideas. But usually they're based on personal experiences. Because I find, my life and people that I talk to, their lives, often much more fascinating and exciting than fiction. I mean, I've been involved in an investigation of an alien from outer space. I've got a photograph of someone who was supposed to be an alien. Now, although it turns out that entity may not have been from another planet. The whole story surrounding that is quite amazing, and there were genuine UFO sightings involved. There's a whole range of things which I was actually involved in as an investigator of this particular report, and I think that would make a fascinating film, not a science fiction film, and not a scary monster film, but one that actually throws light on our attitudes towards people who are supposedly aliens, and throws lights on our sort of superstitious fears, and yet at the same time still suggesting that there might actually be something very odd going on in our universe, and that, you know, maybe there are entities that are involved, you know, intimately involved in human destiny.
Have you any ambitions, both in your acting career and your personal life, that you would like to fulfil?
Well, I've got lots of ambitions. Sometimes it's best not to say them all, because then you sew up your life too easily, But I've got lots of ambitions. Some of that involves directing. I mean, one of my ambitions, I'll tell you that, is to do the remake of Lord of the Rings. When I read Lord of the Rings when I was about 16, for the first time, I wanted to make it then as a movie. I even got as far in the early 70s to write an Allen and Unwin publishers, asking them if I could get hold of the copyright, and they told me that United Artists had already beaten me to it. And I thought, well, there's no point in getting in touch with them because they probably have already got a director. And then when I read in Films and Filming that Ralph Bakshi had just been working on it or just finished it, I thought it was the end of the world as far as I was concerned. But then when I saw it, I thought, oh good, it's not very good. There's still room for a better remake. So that's one of my ambitions, to do the definitive version of Lord of the Rings. Not to act in it, to actually produce and direct it, but I see that as something I'll do when I'm about 60 years old. I mean, I want to be playing, as an actor, in a lot of leading roles which are always challenging people's conceptions about not just disability, but about life in general. Roles which will help people to want a real change in the world that we live in. I want to be involved in the revolutionary process, really, an evolutionary process. I can't see any point in existing unless you want to actually try and bring about real change, in the world. I suppose so writing and directing and any other activity that I might get involved in, I sort of see as being part of that overall sort of ambition to be constantly, trying to improve our lot.